Okay, so it is 10:30 my time. Sorry, let me close this presenter's view real quick because I have two screens. So I'm just really grateful to reconnect with all of you. It's always fun connecting with our team community again. And today we're sharing about using TEAM-CBT with grief. And for those of you who are new to my webinars, my name is Tyann, and I have just been super passionate about TEAM-CBT and dived in to really learn this process. And along the way, I've started to specialize in working with postpartum women. And then I started to work with a lot of like pregnancy loss and even infant loss for moms who've lost their babies, which I think is one of the most painful grief a human being has to endure. And along the way too, I started to work with women who really struggled with losing parents and grieving that, gosh, I wish my parent could be here to get to know my child, and that my child could have known what a wonderful human being my parent was. And in TEAM-CBT, Dr. Burns talks about using mainly empathy to help people work through grief using the 5 secrets of effective communication. And I've seen that that's been a really important and crucial piece. And along the way too, I've also saw that it was really helpful for us to also transition into using other processes to help people who feel like their grief is feeling really stuck or is feeling really excessive. And so I'm excited to share that process with you all today as well, on just what I've explored on my own along the way, to see how to best help my clients, and to share with you some of the grief tools and processes that I've seen to be most helpful for people. Okay. Let me go ahead and move the videos over. I just started with this video for us to just take a moment to take a breath and pause. And I just thought this was just a really beautiful way to connect with life and how transient life is. And probably all of you have also been in an experience to really connect with mortality and the transience of life and experience your own grief through the loss of a loved one. So we're talking about grief specifically tied to bereavement today. Okay, so I wanted to share with you a little bit too about my own personal grief experience. I'm not sure how this will come about because this is actually one of my first times openly sharing about my own grief experience, but this was a picture of me in high school with a group of friends that I was really close to. So these are like my best friends. But I wanted to share with you about a really unique friendship that I've had with Jeff. So the person in the middle is Jeff, who was truly like a brother to me in this process. He was my oldest brother's, one of his really good friends. And then we've just bonded. And I know a lot of people talk about like opposite sex friendships, where it's likely for romantic feelings to develop, but we had actually never felt that with each other. It was just really interesting. It just truly felt like he was my brother and I was his little sister. And we had just such a close bond on just feeling safe with each other, feeling like we could confide in each other. He was older, so he could drive. So he was kind of the cool one in the group. And we would just take these rides around the lake. Near our home is a lake called Lake Overholser. If you're in Oklahoma and joining from Oklahoma, you're probably familiar with that lake. And that was just our space that we would just drive around and talk and laugh, share our hardships, share our struggles with our family. And by the time we were about to graduate high school, so he graduated first, it started to get really bizarre on some of his behaviors. And I was in high school. I didn't know much yet about psychology or mental health, but we realized later on that he had his first psychotic break. So, and then ultimately was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so there was already a lot of grief. And then suddenly, my friend, who was often really calm, really never had a mean bone in his body, was always kind to people, suddenly then became like really erratic and impulsive. And so through that process, I think I realized there was already some grief of losing this really close bond that I had with him. And through this process, we still stayed really close. But then once he was admitted into an inpatient treatment center, they realized he needed lithium. And just through that process, the like speech changes, the way he processes cognition change. And so, and just like in interacting with him, I just started to feel this deep grief on, I still loved him dearly and we were still really close, but it isn't quite my friend anymore, or the same friend that I've had. And so through this process, there were just moments of unpredictable behavior, moments of just disappearing, running away from home. And by the time I was in college, I received a call from my mom that just really shocked me and shook up my world. And she said, Jeff died. And I was just in such shock, like, I just heard from him 2 weeks ago. What could have happened? And just I remember it so clearly, and maybe some of you can relate too, on the moment that you found out that that person, when that person's no longer in existence, it's just the most bizarre experience to be in contact with them. They're here, they're real, you can touch them, you can see them, you can hear them, and then they disappear forever. It's just a really shocking experience. There's just this emptiness and a ball of emotions that come with that. And so she didn't really know much either. She just found out from my brother. And then as we were exploring what happened, he just was at his mom's and then had a psychotic break and then just went out. We're not really sure, maybe just like seeking resources, going out to reach out to people. We're not really sure the intention, but they found him just dead in an alleyway. And we're not even quite sure what happened. And why I'm sharing this story with you is, first, I think it was important to be vulnerable and to allow you as well to connect with moments of grief for your own self. But also to share with you my healing journey in this process, and how one of the tools that I'm going to share with you was probably one of the only practical tools that I've learned through grad school that I took with me. But it really created a lift for me in my healing around this grief. Because one of the things I really carried with me is when I was in college. And as you know, like just starting out in college, we can be really overwhelmed. And in one of his manic phases, he just called me and said, oh, I forgot the piece that he had to move back to Texas to be with his mom because his dad couldn't any longer handle his illness. And then calling me from Texas, he just said, I'm just going to move back to Oklahoma. I don't know how I'm going to do that. And he called me like multiple times while I can't even honestly remember what I was doing. But I got the voice message and I was just kind of overwhelmed. He was like, I'm not quite sure, but maybe I could move in with you. And I was just really overwhelmed knowing, I was just serving tables. I didn't have the resources to take him in, but I didn't want to leave him hanging either. But I knew he was sick as well. And one of the things that sat with me before he died is that I never picked up, and I kept putting off calling him back. And then he died. So I never had the chance. I never had the chance to respond to that. And even now it feels really painful. And I think it's okay to feel that. And maybe some of you have also related to regrets and how you've wrapped things up with your loved ones that you wish could be different. And through this healing process, I want us to really honor that regret and that guilt. And that's not something that we have to completely erase in order to heal and continue to move forward with life. Right? Yeah, thank you for just having that space to hear out a piece of my grief story. And we'll look at stages of grief, which is kind of the typical now, for better or worse, the application of the conceptualization of how we work through grief. And then looking at continuing bonds as well. Yeah, I just want to take the moment. I saw the chat just flash, so I just want to connect with some words there. People are appreciating just the presentation on grief. Yeah, thank you, Maria. I've just appreciated connecting with you. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your vulnerability. Sharing your loss with us. It is an awful thing to lose someone we love so much. Yeah. The pain comes and goes, right? For all of us when we've had these bonds and people we've really loved. Yeah. Thank you, Bree. It helps to build closeness, and maybe many of us can relate to that. People are feeling emotional. Thank you for that, Ed. Loss and grief is probably one of the most painful experiences, I think, of life, and sometimes feels like the price of loving another person, right? Yeah. It's hard to lose a dear friend. Thank you for your heart being with me. I appreciate all of your kind words and the outpouring of love and connection. But yeah, you're also here to learn some tools to help your clients and maybe even yourself through this healing journey. And so stages of grief, initially created by Dr. Kluber-Ross, was actually meant for people going through a terminal illness. Like that was their internal process of going through those emotions of anger, denial, anger, bargaining, etc., until we get to acceptance. And through some grief research specifically related to bereavement, we see that that actually isn't the most helpful way to look at grief through the loss of a loved one. That we don't actually quite go through stages. And sometimes people may feel some of the intense emotions of the anger and other things. And sometimes people have some peace surrounding that process. And so there's actually not stages or specific ways or necessarily even a mold for people to go forward or backward to. And the grieving process for going through a terminal illness, by the end of that, people reach acceptance or maybe a sense that I just have to accept this new life of this way of existing. For grieving a loved one, we don't really see like an endpoint of acceptance. And what is a more helpful way to conceptualize grief through bereavement is actually it's a process where we do learn to adjust, but we actually just redefine our relationship with that person. We don't actually just go through the grief and let them go or accept this process that they're gone. It's helpful to see that the bond with them continues and it endures. And likely for those of you who have lost loved ones, you still have a bond with them. That doesn't ever go away. It may transform and you may connect with them in another way. But I definitely still have clients who say, I say goodnight to my mom every night still, for the past 10 years, even though she's not here any longer, right? And that bond continues to be there. We still remember them. They still touch our lives in many different ways indefinitely. So it's helpful to not see it as stages, but to see it as it's a process of adjusting and redefining your relationship. And that relationship never ends. The grief is not something that we just go through to let go or move on from the loss of our loved ones. Instead, it's there for us to form a different relationship with them. And so I really love and appreciate that research on bereavement, because that really feels true for me too. And many of the clients that I've worked with, that bond endures, and it's helpful to see it as a way to work on forming a different relationship, because that bond will always be there until our own passing, instead of seeing that this is just a stages that I go through with different emotions and then I accept or move on. So specifically with TEAM now, so those of you who are new to TEAM, TEAM is that acronym of we go through testing. So I still do, of course, the brief mood survey to see where they're at in their mood. And then with empathy, as you all know, Dr. Burns talks about for people going through grief, there's kind of this thought that maybe empathy is all that we need. But often what I've seen is if they're grieving and it's painful enough for them to seek help and to seek treatment, likely there's many other layers that we could be helpful to them in working through. Oftentimes I'll see too, like, then there's anxiety about future losses or guilt that they're still really carrying, that then makes the grieving process not just this healthy sadness that honors love, but it's still a really heavy, painful experience for them to go through. I think there aren't a lot of spaces for us to talk about our grief. People often then feel uncomfortable around grief. I think in our society too, there just is almost like this fear of going there, right? Like if someone's gone through grief, many of my clients who have lost their child or have lost their parent, they say, we'll talk about it at the funeral. And then maybe there's moments that it can come up, but a lot of times people are afraid to go there. They're afraid that it'll bring up more pain. It's kind of like our emotophobia. We're afraid that we'll make that person cry if we bring that up. We're afraid that we'll create more pain. Maybe it's uncomfortable. People don't know how to respond. Sometimes they may go to the opposite end too. They may pry too much and we're not ready to go there. So for various reasons, there isn't a lot of spaces to share our grief. We almost feel like there's the funeral and maybe a few days you take off work, but then you should kind of just close it up, right? And not really bring it up anymore. So it doesn't make people uncomfortable or afraid to hurt you or something along those lines. So for us, I think we can create such and provide such a gift for our clients when we really create space to go there when they're hurting and losing their loved ones, a parent, a sibling, a really close friend, even pets. I've used some of these tools where I've had people I've worked with who, like, their pets were their best friend for the past 13 or so years. And we can just really create space to really embrace their loved ones and to hear about it and to honor that bond that they've had with them, that they continue to have with them, right? So we can ask these more targeted grief inquiries of, what do you miss about them? I don't think they get that question enough, to where they could really share about this person. And when there's moments that we can share about that, I think it feels really good. What was your relationship like? What do you remember about them? Are there any special memories that you have with this person? And when we share about our grief, sometimes there's tears, but sometimes there's a lot of joy in talking about these special memories that we've had with that person. And I think that's another gift that we can create for them, that it doesn't have to be all tears and heartache. It could be these special memories and things you remember, gifts that that person leaves with you, right? How did your relationship, how did your bond with them still impact you today? What do you love about this person? Other questions we can talk about is the specific event that can be really painful that maybe they haven't even had space to process through. For many people, that grief, that moment of finding out about the death feels very much like a trauma. And we even see that to be a truth for people going through grief of losing a child, even in a pregnancy loss or an infant loss, that there's even more similar symptoms to PTSD. That memory is just so clear for them when they found out about it. And a lot of times there aren't a lot of spaces for them to share about it. And so we know with healing trauma, the two things that keep trauma going are negative thoughts about that event, where they may blame themselves or say it's their fault or said, I should have done more, and also avoidance of going there. And I don't think people going through grief necessarily avoid going there. There just aren't a lot of spaces for them to process through that moment. And so we can ask them about that. And it's often really clear for them. How did you find out that they died? How did you react to it? Were you able to say goodbye? Because oftentimes there's these lingering wishes and yearnings of how those last moments could be with that person. And we can create space for them to really process that. How does the death still affect you today? Are there words that you wish you could have expressed? And then this kind of sets up for the tools later on, are there items or events that still remind you of your loved ones? Because as we know with grief, it'll continue to come in waves. There are moments that we maybe aren't bothered by the grief at all. And then there are just sudden moments unexpectedly that'll hit you really hard during an anniversary or something that came up. And that picture that I've shared with you, I actually didn't plan on sharing with you all this story when I planned this webinar. But the girl on the very right, we're all still in connection. And so she's been in New York, and she came back just to visit us in Oklahoma. And so this was just like 3 weeks ago. And when she came back, she had brought these photo albums just for us to go down memory lane. We've all been friends since middle school. And that was when that photo came up. And so I just unexpectedly didn't expect to see Jeff's face. And that was when it just really hit me. And you all may relate to that too, on just moments that things that come up, items come up, events that still reminds you of them. And this allows them to process what are the moments where those waves of grief can come up for me. And a lot of them are just unexpected too. So of course we go through the typical 5 secrets, but I think those targeted grief inquiries can be really helpful in honoring the story and the love and the pain that they still experience through this. An analogy for doing feeling empathy, a lot of people talk about just a sense of emptiness after the loss. And one analogy that I've encountered that seems to resonate with a lot of my clients who may hear things like, if they've lost a child or even lost a parent, like, well, at least, you still have all of your other loved ones who are there for you. At least you still have your other children. Where I think through the best intentions, they're trying to cheer you up. But it at the moment sometimes feels invalidating, because it's saying, right now, I'm just really hurting. And hearing like, just think of the positives or think of the things that are still there may still feel very invalidating of the pain and the emptiness that you feel from that loss. And so when we talk about that emptiness and the bizarre experience of something that was physically present that you could see, touch, connect with, and then they're gone for forever. The analogy that I've heard that I've connected with is losing a loved one is very much like losing a limb, a loved one that you're close to, because I also realize there's other complex grief where the relationship wasn't quite close, and there's resentment and other mixed emotions that I think the team process is very powerful and healing. But this is someone that we've just really been present with, had a bond with. It just very much feels like losing a limb. Nothing can really replace it. So let's say you just lost your left arm. It's been a part of you for so long. And to suddenly lose that and it's gone forever, you learn to adapt, you learn to adjust, and you learn to still live life, but you never think that life is then suddenly better without them. And if you lost a limb, no one ever really says like, oh, at least you still have your legs, or at least you still have, your torso or something like that. Usually people just say like, man, they lost their arm or their leg. That really sucks. That part that's been a part of them for so long is no longer there. And there's going to be constant reminders that having that limb would be a much more ideal existence. So you learn to adapt without your other arm, but there's reminders like, man, it would be nice to have the other set of hands right now for me to pick this thing up. It would be nice to have my set of hands to hug my child or to move certain things that I want to move. And that's the same thing with losing a loved one that you've been close to. There are going to be these constant reminders in everyday life that comes up from time to time that makes you think about how nice it would be to still have that limb, and the same thing of how nice life would be to still have that person around. And my clients that I've shared this with just share like, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. This part has been part of me, whether it's that baby that was growing in me or the child that was with me or the parent that I've known my whole life, the sibling that I've known my whole life, and they're suddenly gone. There's this emptiness, but it's always going to be a piece that I've remembered that has always been crucial to my functioning and to my life. Before we move forward, did you all have any, let me pause for just thoughts or questions about the empathy piece or the analogy that I've just shared? I think there were a couple of questions here, and I'll definitely read all of your comments later on too. Rima's asking, would you deal with it the same for dissociation and grief trauma? Dissociation? I'm not completely sure about that question on dissociation and grief trauma. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, Rima?
Do you want me to write it or shall I speak?
Up to you. Yeah, whatever's easy for you to clarify. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just because you're saying like, because a lot of, you were saying before, a lot of it is not, they don't deal with the emotions and they kind of avoid talking about it, and that because it causes too much pain and grief and whatever. But when you have this association, you've kind of detached yourself, so you don't really understand so even if you talk about it, you talk about it without really expressing much emotion about it. So I'm wondering if these kind of techniques would still kind of be helpful.
Oh, yeah. So you're saying like it's not just like an avoidance where they don't have space to talk about or to process the trauma, but like the body has coped in a way that this was so painful that I've emotionally detached through dissociation. I'm kind of numbed out, right?
Exactly.
I don't have really feelings tied around this. Yeah, definitely. More often than not, I see a grief comes with a lot of emotions, but let me think of moments when there's kind of a numbness how we approach this. I think still going through the team process, and there may be an important piece of doing some resistance work, right? Like what is the dissociation doing for them? How does it benefit them to not right now go there with the emotions? And so when we do specificity, maybe it isn't time right now for them to go there. And there's benefits. The dissociation may protect them. Maybe this isn't the best time. Maybe there's too much going on in life that sometimes people feel like if I connect with this, it could really break me. And then when you look at that resistance on how it served, this association serves them, you can really sit with open hands on, is this a good time to move forward with that? Or maybe it's there to protect them at this time, and we don't have to go there. And usually through our time together, I'll see clients who are like more numb or detached from their feelings, just going through the team model and even having a daily mood log where they can identify their emotions if they ultimately choose to go there, that despite these benefits of dissociation or numbing out, that I want to go there, then it really starts to slowly uncover into a safe space. I had a woman that avoided her grief so much. Her mom died when she was a young adult. They were so close, like her mom was her best friend. She avoided it so much that she hid everything that reminded her of her mom. Like all of their photos together were in a drawer. There was nothing hung up. Anything about mom or that mom made was hidden away. And so it took time for us that we saw like she needed to do this, because as a young adult with not a lot of support in her life, if she was to connect with how much pain that loss had brought her, she said it would probably be debilitating. And so through then our work together, going through the team model, when she was ready to go there, we had to work through resistance first of like, what are all of the good reasons to not go here? And when she was able to talk back and say, I think it's about time for me to not run away. And then I would ask her, and avoiding this pain, this traumatic loss of your mom, because she found her dead as well, avoiding it has allowed you to just feel like you're moving, you can move forward with life without the dam breaking and the pain flooding you. Why would you want to go there? And she said, I think it's time I stopped running away, because actually the suppressing of my pain, I think, is what's causing all of the anxiety and the stuckness. So I think there's some resistance work we can do around that. But once they're ready, just going through the team process can also be really healing and powerful. Did that help to answer your question, Rima?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let me see if there was anything else here. Yeah, I'm feeling kind of moved by some of the comments, specifically with Melissa sharing about having had a stillbirth. And I can share with you, in working with so many women now through pregnancy loss, that it still like shatters my heart to connect with a mom who's been through such a painful grief. And so thank you for still being here and sharing that pain with us. And I also appreciate the outpouring of love and connection from the others as well. I'm sorry, I'm looking over here because I have the other monitor up. Candy is saying, sometimes I still ask people if they still have experiences of the deceased person or a pet. Yeah, I think that's great. Try to normalize that for folks who do have visions and sounds of their lost loved ones. Yeah, through some of, I had worked at a grief group called Calm Waters. It was a support group for people who have lost parents or spouses. And they do talk about, when it feels appropriate, you can talk to that person about what do you feel about the thought that sometimes I still feel like my loved one is still with me? And have you had those kinds of experiences? And for others, it could also be helpful for them to talk about what happens after death, and have these even like spiritual discussions with them about their views on that and how that still impacts their grief. So I think that's a great thought there. Okay. Doesn't look like there's any other questions. So let me move forward with the next steps here. because I wanted to show you a demo as well. Yes.
Carla's had her hand raised.
Oh, thank you so much, Shamiko. Carla, you had a question?
No, I just wanted to say thank you because I lost my son 5 years ago. He was 19. And to hear you talk about the stages of grief and, you know, how it originated, I didn't know that. And also, too, because it felt like I needed to, like I wasn't progressing if I wasn't moving through these stages. Exactly. And so that in itself kind of kept me stuck or feeling like, oh, am I just really angry, or have I accepted it? But really it is that bond. And I had those spiritual experiences. Yesterday, it was a balloon on my line. There was no parties in the neighborhood. And I knew that that was my son. The butterflies that come around. And even today, like looking at a license plate driving in, I saw the number 97, which was his year of birth, and then the number 19, which was his age of death. And I'm just thinking, wow, you know, like how he's with me. And to have this meeting today, and I have a grief support group tonight, like it just, the spiritual part of it, it just feels like it's all coming together. But to really hear about the stages and like that bond, because the bond never goes away. Like you said, it's that limb. It's not there, but you know, you wish you had it still there so we can continue these bonds. I'm really appreciating you, Tyann, for this training. So thank you.
Carla, first, thank you so much for sharing your insight about that process and sharing with us about your loss. I can't even imagine what you've had to go through to lose your son when he was 19. I also think it's really beautiful where there's these spaces of connection, where when we're talking about that continuing bond, it's not just how their life has impacted us and will always impact us, but you're also saying there's signs, there's these spiritual aspects about it, that the energy may go from that physical body, but it's transformed into other ways, you know. And for many of our clients, that spiritual aspect is very healing. When we talk about, I still feel them with me. I feel this presence, these moments of like this random balloon, the butterflies, seeing his birth year. There's just something very beautiful about that energy that continues that bond and shows up for you, right? Yeah, and so you resonate with, instead of going through stages, which then I even have a judgment of myself, like I'm not progressing because I should reach this certain space, and that's actually not even what originally it was. The stages of grief was created for bereavement, for understanding bereavement. It's actually more so understanding grief as a way of transforming this relationship and continuing the bond. Yeah, people are also really appreciating the insights that you're sharing there, Carla. Yeah, the reminders that he's still with you. There's something really beautiful about that. Oh, I didn't even share about the invitation. And so when there's still sometimes a variety of issues that they've brought on, right? But if you're still feeling like this grief could be one of the main things that they want to work on, and through choosing the problem to work on, they've chose like, I want to work on this grief. It feels like I'm stuck, or it's excessive. The invitation would be a little bit more specific on, you know, you shared with me a lot about feeling stuck in your grief and how you can't move on. And I do have tools that can help you work through this grief and work on this grief, while still honoring your loved one and the loss. Would you be interested in doing this grief work? And I may dangle a bit of a carrot where I've worked with clients who've experienced a lot of painful losses and found these tools to be really helpful in creating a new understanding of their grief and some relief for them. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in doing this work, or sometimes we just need space to talk about the loss, and that may be all that we need. I'm wondering what you would prefer. So it's very open hands in allowing them, like truly, sometimes they just need that space to process the loss because they don't have it anywhere else. And then we go into the miracle cure question. And if you did get what you're looking for from our work together around your grief, how would your grief be different? How would change about how you're dealing with losing your child, your mom, and call them by name if that's what they however they referred to their child, right? Losing Sam or losing your brother, Brian. What change would you want to see around it? And then we could see if there's expectations of maybe still being held to, like, I should go through these stages, or I'm not making progress, or just whatever beliefs they still have around their grief. And I think we could really help to shift some of that, those expectations of how they should grieve. And I think the stages of grief too sometimes makes us feel like there's a right way or a wrong way to grieve, but there really isn't. There's just a bond that really mattered. And our grieving process is helping us redefine that bond as it continues to exist forever. So I still use the daily mood log with them. And initially, I actually even really like to use the daily mood log just for empathy. But I do transition to it by understanding a moment in time when they've struggled with the grief. So can you tell me a moment in time when you found yourself struggling with the grief? And I just kind of use their wording if they said, I've been stuck, or that it's too excessive. Like a moment when you've shared with me that you just really felt stuck in it, or it felt like too much. Grief is truly this complex ball of emotions. Grief is one word, and we just think of sadness or tears, but there's so many emotions that come with grief that I think the mood log really helps to unpack their grief, because a lot of times people just feel that knot or that pain of loss, but they don't even quite have the words of all of the emotions that they are experiencing. And so I use the daily mood log for empathy, and it may even be like 3, 4, or 5 sessions where we just look at the mood log, and we're slowing down and we're connecting with moments when you felt anxious about the future. So of course there's some of that sadness, but we connect with then the guilt. Is there shame? I always hear thoughts of, more often than not, of some guilt about I should have done something. Many of my clients through pregnancy loss, infant loss, also have thoughts of like, if I didn't do XYZ, this wouldn't have happened, right? And we can just be present to connect with that. We're not trying to challenge that. We don't try to uplift them, cheerlead them. We just connect with that, like, wow, that guilt can be so painful, that you've had this most painful loss, and it's hard to not look at what you've done wrong, right? So we're just staying with them, even though this is specificity and it's going into assessment of resistance. I think just really slowing down with the mood log and connecting with the feelings is a powerful process in working on their grief. And once we really create time and space to connect with all of the emotions, people talk about the loneliness. People talk about self-consciousness, about like, others think I should just be over this by now. There's frustration, there's anger. I think that's really important to create space for that. Anger, frustration, resentment. I've had clients who talk about, like, I'm angry with God. Like I've been faithful and this just feels so unfair. You know, we're a couple that have really worked hard to, you know, have a child and to care for our child, and then my child's gone. And so I'm really angry about that. And I think it's important to make space for that, whether you're angry with God, with yourself, with your loved one. Let's just make space to connect with that. So again, multiple sessions. It's not just like, oh, let's do 20 minutes of connecting with the feelings when I'm doing the grief work with them. And then, of course, we can still identify negative thoughts or just thoughts that come up for you when you're grieving. So let's go back to this moment when you're grieving and you're feeling lonely or you're feeling guilty. What comes up for you? What do you find yourself saying to yourself? I should have done more. I should have spent more time with them. For me, it was I should have picked up. I should have called back. I should have just been there to support him, even if it was overwhelming and scary. Right? A recent woman I've worked with who's lost her mom, she was her sole caregiver. And, just a lot of medical problems. And one of the guilt that she was still carrying around is, I should have seen the signs. I'm with her every day. I should have seen that she was declining and took her to the doctor earlier. And so she still carried that around, even though it's been 3 years, that that guilt was still really heavy for her. Sometimes we also feel guilt that I shouldn't be feeling happy. I feel guilty in moments of laughter and moments of living. So there's also the guilt of just existing, and sometimes joy that's hard for us. Okay. Regina's asking if you'll get the PowerPoint. Yeah, everyone who registered, if you go back to that registration page, you'll see the handout attached to it. So just go through the email that I've sent you on the registration page, and you'll be able to see the handout. Okay, so we're saying we've gone through the whole mood log, made time to really create space to connect with all of the emotions, see if there's still lingering guilt, anger, self-consciousness, like there's probably a should statement on like, I shouldn't be so bothered by this. Like I've had a client with a pregnancy loss where she said, it's been 8 months and it still feels like it just happened yesterday. I shouldn't still be feeling this heaviness around losing my baby. So there's that self-consciousness, and I think it's really important to capture those to do some of the healing work there. Okay, so the magic button is, if you could push a button and all of these painful feelings around your grief would disappear, and instead you'd feel more peace with the loss. And whatever else they said in their miracle cure question, I'll pull into here, where they say like, I don't want it to be so excessive, or it's affecting my other relationships. Where you'd feel more peace and it's not so excessive or affecting your other relationships, would you want to push that button? I'll see kind of a mix actually in the response to this. A lot of people will still say yes, but it's not uncommon for people to say like, no, I don't know if I'd want to get rid of these painful emotions. Because with grief, I think sometimes people are already recognizing like, my painful emotions really honor this bond that I have with them. And often grief is not the problem. It's often not having space to express it, not having space to work through it, because I think our society just doesn't know how to deal with grief. We're avoidant with it. No one really asks them, I'm like, hey, what do you miss about them? Tell me more about it. What's coming up for you? And so that is that avoidance, not intentionally, is often what creates that sense of like, this is too much, or their stuckness. Because for my client who had the pregnancy loss and it's been 8 months, she said like, my husband doesn't want to go there with talking about it. And then my loved ones are almost like avoiding me, where they think I'm too fragile right now. So no one's asking me about, hey, how are you feeling with the loss? And she said there are moments when she said like, I'm dying to talk about it, and it doesn't, I don't know where to have an outlet for it. And then she's also feeling protective because the one person that she often talked to was her mom. But her mom is also really grieving losing her grandbaby, right? And so she's saying, I just don't, like, I'm connecting with the people who are hesitant to bring this up with me because I'm scared of bringing it up with her and then really creating more sadness for her. I feel protective of her. So often it's the lack of space that becomes a painful piece there. Okay. Going into positive reframing. So during times of grief, we may want to push the button to get rid of all of the painful feelings, especially when it feels like I'm still stuck or it's too much. And then I just share with them, if they want to push the button, it's normal. It's normal to want to push that button to get rid of the painful feelings. And even if they don't want to push the button, right? Like maybe I think you're connecting with these painful feelings are serving a purpose and they're here for a reason. And so what I see is one healthy way that we can address these feelings that are coming up for you is to really actually allow them to be there and to even see why they make sense, why they're appropriate, what they do for you, and even the values that you hold around bonds, relationships, and the love that you have for the people that matter to you. And I'm skipping ahead to the next slide, but I realized in working with grief, it's been helpful to not use the word positive, because in positive reframing, we use that a lot. What does this feeling show about you that's really positive? What does it show about your values? I had that really backfire one time in working with a client through losing her child. And even though we were trying to look at how this feeling serves her and why it's appropriate, using the word positive, she said, I'm tired of hearing that there's something positive in this. There's nothing positive in these feelings. And so, or in this event. So she didn't even hear that we were looking at the feelings. She said, there's nothing positive about losing my child. And so I think through doing this work, I'm realizing that it's more helpful to connect with, let's just sit with your feelings and see why they're appropriate, why they make sense, and maybe what they even do for you and what they show about your love for your mom, or what they show about your relationship and your values in that bond. Right? Because positive reframing, it often is like one of the tools that goes so well, like it's like that healing element for so many of my clients. But in seeing that in moments that sometimes in the grief work that I get stuck, I think just hearing the word positives, they almost hear like that invalidating space of, this loss is a good thing or something. Like think of the good about it. So yeah, I was just saying that. So I don't really use the word positives when I share with clients on let's look at why your feeling makes sense and what they do for you, and even what it shows about you and your bond with your mom or your loved one or whoever it is. I've really liked this analogy that I've actually pulled from a trainee, actually. So just sharing with her about the button, she said, so pushing the button really to get rid of our emotions is like trying to push the beach ball into the water. The harder we push, the greater the force back up. Same thing with our grief. When the feelings come up and we say, I'm not grieving right, I'm not progressing, I shouldn't be feeling all of this intensity, I try to push it down, the greater the force back up. It feels more stuck, it feels more excessive. So with the positive reframing, instead, we're allowing the feelings to be there. And it's like floating. Instead of trying to push the beach ball down, it's like floating with the beach ball. And just riding the waves and even seeing its value, right? When we can look at that, then we can engage in it better and engage with life better with the beach ball around. I really love this quote. I think it's like the core of positive reframing around grief, where Amy Anderson, I'm not even quite sure who she is, but in exploring grief and doing better grief work with people, I encountered this quote that grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give, but cannot. All that unspent love gathers up in the corner of your eyes, that lump in your throat, in that hollow part of your chest. And grief is just love with no place to go, because that person is no longer present, physically present for you to express that. And so grief is really just love. I've already shared this with you on avoiding using the word positive. Just for me, I've seen that go better when doing grief work. Just why does this emotion make sense? How does it even serve you? What does it do for you? And what does it show about your bond with your mom? When they've heard a lot of like, it's for the best, or just think of the good, because I think it's been so invalidating of pain that maybe through that process, the positive reframing, when we continue to bring up the word positive over and over, could feel invalidating. Okay, let me see. Magic dial. Yeah, and then we do the same thing with the dial. What's a little bit different too, though, is I ask them if it makes sense to dial it up. So how much of this feeling should we keep in order to keep these important benefits and in order for it to really still honor your bond, right? How much should we keep of the guilt, of the self-consciousness? And sometimes they say, like, maybe it makes sense to turn up more of the sadness because I haven't allowed it to be there. So how much of the emotion would actually make sense to keep all of these values and what it does for you, while maybe shedding some of the intensity that doesn't make sense for you anymore, like that debilitating guilt or the self-consciousness that you should be moving on faster. Sometimes we have to dial up before it can be worked through. And I think dialing up is part of just riding the waves when the grief hits for them. And then when we ride the waves, that it'll ultimately always come down. The dial allows the emotions to be there, keeping the benefits and the level of intensity that makes sense when working through the grief. So the last parts is then, of course, methods. I actually often don't go to identifying the distortions. For some reason, in doing grief work, I think it's just tapped into like such an emotional space. I think identifying the distortions could still be really helpful. If that resonates with you and your client, definitely move forward with that. I've seen instead transitioning to the double standard to be more powerful, because when I've done like identifying the distortions, it then starts to feel kind of dry. Like imagine like working with someone who just lost their parent, or it's been several years and there's still that thought of like, I should have done more, I should have saw the signs. And then we go into like, let's now identify the distortions in this thought. I think instead, like we've honored this thought, right? And the feelings that the thought's there because you really love them and care about them and wish you could have done the best for them. I think it's more healing when we stick with that emotional space instead of going into the analytical part, because through the double standard, I often see they do shed the distortion, but it seems more compassionate and healing than going into that space. That analytical space with identifying the distortions. So I remember clearly a client that was working through the pregnancy loss, the one with the, it's been 8 months and why does it still feel like it just happened yesterday? And we went into the double standard, and one of her thoughts was, I probably did something wrong, and I had a glass of wine before I found out that I was pregnant, and maybe that just caught up, and then I lost my baby, 7 months in, so the pregnancy was pretty advanced already. And then we went into the double standard, and in just setting it up, like I just shared with her, I'm a dear friend you really care about, but the unique thing about me is I'm exactly like you in every way. I also just went through this really painful loss for 8 months. And, I'm telling myself that I must have done something, that this was me. And I just love to hear, you're my dear friend, just some of your honest thoughts, but also with compassion, just like you would share with a dear friend. And in just setting that up, she said, I don't even need to go there. I could just tell you that none of this is your fault. Right. And she started to even quote different things for me, like, there, one in 3 pregnancies or 1 in 4 pregnancies end in pregnancy loss. And like, she started to identify the distortions too, like you're blaming yourself for something that you would have never wanted. You have never asked for this, and you've done everything you can to really make this pregnancy healthy. You've watched your diet, you've done all sorts of things, so you're not giving yourself enough credit for all the things that you've done to really take care of your child, monitoring your food intake, making sure there's enough proteins and veggies. And so she identified the distortions and shed the distortions, like mental filter, discounting the positives, but it was in a way that just felt a lot more warm, and sticking with that emotional part, I thought was pretty healing. Okay, I'll share with you the grief method that really was powerful in helping me. So through grad school, I had a professor who was really into narrative therapy. And the grief method was from him. And he just had us break up in pairs and think of one person that we've lost, that where the grief still comes up for us from time to time. And when I finally went into that tool, I think I've cried tears that were in there that haven't had space for like a couple of years. And there was just like this, I remember still leaving the class in tears, and many of us were as well. And my professor was like, oh, Diane, are you okay? Because I was just kind of breaking down. And I told him, yeah. And it didn't look like I was okay, but there was something about that that just created such a lift for me. And I'd like to share that with you. Before we go into the grief methods, though, we also see that ongoing rituals to honor the life and the continued bond is a really helpful process when we're working through grief. So many of my clients who have lost a child, a parent, a sibling that they really wish could still be present, and we can continue to still honor that life. You can do a balloon release, a lantern release to connect with them. I thought it was interesting, Carla brought up the balloon because I have the slide on the balloon. So maybe this is another reminder from her son. He's still here. Right? Any kind of creative works, I've had clients then honor their bond and their loved one by making a piece of art, writing a poem about their child. I had a client whose grandmother was a poet, and she asked her grandmother to write a poem about her child, and it was just really beautiful. And they framed it, and she just put Christmas lights on it and put a little plant there, and then just had this little shrine to honor her child. And it was just a beautiful way of continuing that bond and the love that they've had for them. You can also write out gifts that person has left with you, how their life has impacted you, because there will always be gifts that person has left and how they've connected with you. So in doing my own work around my grief, the gifts that Jeff has left me is just how to be loyal, how to really be present for another person, the reminder of how important it is to have a bond that there's truly unconditional love. There's just so many gifts that endure in that process, and definitely a sense of loyalty has always stuck with me in the connection with him. You can write out their life story. I've had a client make an ornament for her child, and so every year around Christmas, they'll pull out this ornament, and she could remember him in that way. The grief method is similar to this one, actually, writing a letter to them, and then you can write a response from them, because you know better than anyone their words, their language that they would use with you. It can be really emotional, but also really connecting in that continuing bond, because that memory of them and that memory of their voice and their language and what they would use with you is really powerful. It's interesting too, even with a child or a baby that never had words. I've had a client do this as well, to write a letter to their baby and to share how much they love them. And the response from the baby is like, I love you too. Even though I've never had the words to share that with you, that's always been true, right? Continuing the bonds through planting a tree, creating a garden for them, making a memory box of their favorite things, of photos of that child or photos of your loved one. I really love this one as well. No one has to know, and you don't have to make anyone uncomfortable, but you can just light a candle. When you miss their warmth and you miss their presence, just light a candle, and that flame represents the energy, the love, the bond that's still there. And for those of you who believe in souls, that their soul is still present with you, and you can feel the warmth and the energy of that creation there. Annual ceremonies. For us in the Vietnamese culture, the anniversary of our loved one's death, we make a meal for them. And so if that resonates with you, you can do that. I had another client who baked a cake for her baby. And I had another one, it was so sweet, for Christmas. They had a tradition of baking a cake together for Jesus. So just to say happy birthday, Jesus, every Christmas. And then she would then make a little cake for her baby as well. And so every Christmas from that point on, it would be a happy birthday, Jesus cake, and then a cake for her baby. That would just be a way of honoring that bond. And for her, it was knowing that like, my baby is with Jesus and Jesus is protecting my baby right now. So even though we couldn't continue that bond, my baby is in this space with a lot of joy and protection and love. And so she said for her, Jesus and God is the representation of love and peace. And that's what my baby's wrapped around. And so they just added a cake for the baby. And another way of just honoring the continued bond is riding the waves, right? Let the tears flow, but it's looking at the tears as each teardrop honors my love, honors the bond, honors the complexities of our relationship and the yearning for them to be there. So it's just a way of reframing when that pain comes up, that every teardrop, let it be there, just ride the waves with it. Every lump in the throat, every sensation of pain that comes up just honors the bond and reminds you that that bond will always be there, will always be there with you. Okay, the grief method, and I want to bring it to life. Hopefully we have enough time for this. I'm just noticing there's a hand up. Regina, did you have a question before I share with you all about the grief method?
Yeah, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was wondering, because I know, well, two things. Do you ever use these methods with divorce? Because there's a grief in divorce as well.
That's a good question. I have not. I haven't even thought of that. I love like when the creative mind goes and you can look at maybe that could really be a helpful process for them.
Because it's a loss.
It definitely is a loss. Yeah. So these are mainly tools strictly for bereavement. So grief through the loss of a loved one. But I think there's plenty of ways to really be creative. And if someone is like grieving their relationship and the love that they've had, that's now no longer the same. I mean, you've married this person for a reason, right? There was a time when it was just a really important bond. And so, yeah, I think there are definitely different ways you can apply that to grief from divorce, for sure. Okay. And more often than not, I think just going through the TEAM process, like what's going on, what feelings are coming up for them in the divorce, is their blame, is their self-blame, is their guilt, then a lot of the other TEAM tools can be helpful for that too.
Okay, then the other question was, I have a client that lost her husband and the pastor said something to her. So I was using a DML that really hurt her feelings, made her feel like she wasn't a good wife. And I kind of struggled with not using a DML. I was just trying to be empathetic, but I was like, I think I need to move to the DML. So, and just working through that because her pastor, the comment made her feel like she wasn't a good wife.
Yeah, definitely. There's probably a lot of painful emotions in that, with guilt and regrets. That can be really helpful for us to connect with that first and to see if that's something they want to work on. Because sometimes, again, just talking through it is enough. So it's just being open hands with giving them options on where to go with the treatment. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Did those answer both of your questions there, Regina?
Yes.
Thank you for those. Thanks. Okay. I noticed there's 20 minutes and I want to have enough time to bring this to life. Yeah, Carla, and some anger. And Jennifer, Jen has been gracious enough to help me demo this tool, this grief method. So let me do the quick didactics and then I can bring it to life and then make some space for questions for you all. And then in August, my co-host Jamiko actually has volunteered for the personal work. So just really appreciating her putting herself out there and her vulnerability to help us walk through this whole treatment process, where I'll walk you through each of these steps in that work with her through the loss of her father. So thank you again, Jamiko, for doing that. Okay, I call this the grief method because I don't have a creative name for it. Maybe you all can think of creative names and you can send them to me. Richard had one that was similar, actually, Richard Lamb, and then Daniel had something that was similar. Neither of their names kind of resonated with me, though. I think Richard called his the medium technique. I don't know, I kind of find mediums kind of creepy, so I didn't really want to call it that with clients. So I still just call it the grief method. Oh, the angel's advocate. Yeah, maybe so, Bridget. That's kind of beautiful. So I will share with clients, I think it's helpful to address process resistance with any tool that can feel a little bit awkward or painful. So I just share with them a dangle the carrot. I have a tool for grief that I think can really be effective for people to work on their grief. Many of my clients say that they feel relief after it. The gentle ultimatum, though, is it can be really emotional and even painful at first, though. Would you like to hear about it to see if you want to give it a try? And so I haven't had a client who said no. So then I would just share with them. So in this tool, I'm going to have you imagine, and so Jen is going to talk about her loss of her mom. So for the sake of simplicity, instead of just leaving a blank space, I'm just going to use mom. But again, refer to the loved one however they refer to it. If they called their baby by name or their brother Brian, then I'm going to have you imagine talking to Brian. I'm going to imagine you talking to your mom and share anything that you've wanted to express. And it could be things that you've wanted to express that you couldn't, or it could be things you've expressed already that you just would love to share with her again. And then once you do that, I'm going to take really solid notes of your exact wording, and then I'm going to become you. I'm going to share these words back to you and have you become your mom to respond to me. And I could imagine maybe already you're feeling like that could be a lot, or even really emotional. But what I see is that since you know them best, instead of me responding to your words, you take on the role of your mom and you do your best to say it how she would say, how you think she would respond to these words. Would you be open to trying that and see where it goes in our work on your grief? And I haven't had a client who said they don't want to go there. So have the client share anything they want to share. I just have them like freely just speak it out, but I then guide them into saying like, it's helpful to speak out loud as if you're talking to her, as if she was here just in those words. What would you say? Like, hey, mom, I want you to know X, Y, Z. And then I'm just taking notes as they're sharing it. And then I'll often prompt for more thoughts too. Anything else you want her to know? You talked about your son graduating from kindergarten last week. Is there anything about your son or your life that you want to share with her? Anything you wanted to express that you didn't have the chance to? So I'm prompting for anything else that they may want to share. If you don't have as much time for that setup, you can also just give it to them as homework. I've done it both ways, and it's both been equally effective, where they just write out in a letter form all the things they want to say to their loved one. And then you'll take on the client's role and you share it in their exact wording verbatim. And then you ask the client to, now I'm going to have you step into the role of being your mom. And so I'm going to imagine that you just left the room and you're now taking on the role of your mom. And I'm going to take on your role and share some of these words with you. And I just want you to do your best to take on her voice and to respond to me. And also, it would be important if you just stay in that role until we're finished, to not step outside of that role. Because sometimes when people are emotionally uncomfortable, they may step out and try to analyze what's going on. But I just have them stay there. So I would share their words. I would also share thoughts and feelings from the mood log, especially if there's like guilty thoughts, like, Mom, I should have done more for you. I can clearly remember a client where I shared, by the time we've talked to Mom, and then I shared with Mom, I should have done more for you and I should have taken you to the doctor sooner. She responded right back. She said, baby, there's nothing you could have done better. I lived as long as I did because of you and your support of me and your love for me. And when she said those words, and as we were processing it, like the tears flowed, but she said, like, there was just a lift in her of that guilt that she's been carrying for those 3 years, that when she heard her mom say, like, baby, there's nothing more that you could have done better. I survived. I lived as long as I have in as much well-being as I had because of you. And so I'm lucky that I had such a daughter, right? And so it's just a really moving process to have them shed their guilt. Or another client that I had just said, like, it just made the grief process feel cleaner. Like, it's now just the sadness that honors the bond instead of the self-beating, the guilt, and all of the other things that come with it. And wrap up with processing the takeaways, what this was like for them, and then you can re-rate the feelings. Okay, I'm going to have this feedback form that I'll send to you all, and I'll send it to you in the chat as well. Your certificate of completion will be sent after you complete it as well. I'm sharing my online course there, and also part 2 of the webinar you can now sign up for. I'll email that to you all as well. But just go to teamcbttraining.com/webinars. I meant to attach that link here, and you can go ahead and sign up for part 2. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring this to life with Jen just for the next few minutes, just so you all can see the setup, because I think demos often help in that process. Jen, can I have you unmute here?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Let me make sure so I can pin you for the recording's sake as well. Okay. Yeah, so Jen, I have a grief tool that I've seen to be really helpful in helping clients work on their grief. And I've also seen clients just share that they found relief and even connection with their loved ones, some healing after they go through this tool. And it's also a tool that can be really emotional at first. Some of my clients can be hit with this pain of grief and a wave of different emotions that come up. Would you, and at the same time, still see like, oh, going through that then allows them to get to the space where they rode the wave, and then it feels like there's more relief. Would you like to hear about the tool and to see if you want to give it a shot and see where it goes?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So
And
this
Tyann, I saw a message that to change to gallery view. I guess.
Oh.
I know that the slide is still up.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, is that better for y'all to be able to see? And you can also change it to speaker at the top right if you want to do that, if that's easier for you all. I think you could also just pin both of our videos or something like that. And actually, let me go to speaker view just for the sake of the recording. I think that's easier for people to see. Okay, and so...
So yes, I do want to do it. I would love to try
it. Yeah, and so in this tool, I'm actually going to have you share some of anything you want to express to your mom. And first, I just want to brief that we've skipped through some of the beginning parts with the empathy, so it may not have as potent of an effect because we haven't positively reframed some of your grief feelings and understood your bond a little bit more. This is just for the sake of the demo of the process. So first, I just want to thank you for doing this. And I appreciate you jumping in and volunteering to demo this without going through the whole process. But I'm going to have you express just anything you'd like to share with your mom. And it could be things that you have shared already that you want to share again, or maybe some lingering things that you haven't expressed that you would like to share with her. And then I'm going to just take some really solid notes of what you're sharing with me. And I'm going to then switch and take on your voice and share with you these thoughts. And the part that can be a bit painful or emotional is then I'm going to have you take on the role of your mom. And you're going to respond to these thoughts because you will know best what she would say and how she would say it and what language she would use. And I find that when clients are willing to go there and to stay in that role until we wrap up with the tool, there's just some connection and peace and healing that they can get around this process. Would you be open to trying that out and seeing where it goes?
Sure.
Okay. All right, Jen. So right now I'm just going to have you share, and it's helpful actually to speak out loud as if you were talking to your mom, some of the words that you would like to express to her, some messages that you'd want to express to her.
Okay.
What would you want her to know? What would you want to say to her if you could talk to her right now?
Well, there's so much. I would like to share with her about what my life is like and how hard it is to not be able to share that with her.
Yeah, what would you say?
Basis.
What kind of words would you use to say that to her right now?
I'd say I'm a lot happier now in life, and I've done a lot of growing, and I feel a lot of sadness that that you're not here to see that. And of course I would say all kinds of stuff about my kids and how wonderful they are.
Yeah, you're doing a great job. I'm already feeling really moved about what you would share with her already, Jen. And what is like with the client, I would definitely create more space for that. But what is one or two things you would share about your kids? And just like you did on, I'm a lot happier now with life, just as if you could talk to her. How would you share that? What's one or two things you would share?
Well, Tenzin is brilliant playing your piano. He's pretty extraordinary. And in addition to being extraordinary in general, and I would let you know that Dawa is just delightful, and he keeps us laughing and entertained, and you would love them both dearly.
Yeah. You love them both dearly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did your mom get to meet your kids, Jen?
No.
Yeah. Sometimes I often see there's ongoing grief with that for people. I'm like,
oh yeah,
I wish you could have met these awesome little humans and how blessed they would be with you in their lives too, right? Let me make sure I got your kids' names correct. The first is Benton.
Tenzin. It's Tenzin.
Tenzin. I love unique names. Tenzin. And your other, so
the other son.
The other son is Dawa.
Dawa. It's Dawa.
Dawa. Wow. Yeah. I love these beautiful, unique names. And at this moment, Jen, I'm going to now take on your voice and share with you some of these words. But you won't be yourself anymore. You're going to leave the room now, and I'm going to have you take on your mom's role.
Okay.
Just channel your mom to the best of your ability to take on her words, her voice, her language, how she would respond to you. Yeah. How did you address your mom? Did you just call her mom?
Yeah.
Yeah. You have any questions or thoughts before we jump into that?
No, I don't think so. I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Well, Jen just left the room, and I'm now Jen, actually. Mom, I just want you to know I'm a lot happier now in life. And I've done a lot of growing. I've worked really hard to do that, actually. And I just feel a lot of sadness that you're not here to see that. I wish you could see my growth.
Well, honey, I wish I was there too. And I actually feel like I am. And I see you growing.
How do you feel about my growth, Mom?
I'm very proud. I'm very proud. And I knew that you would do that.
You knew that. You believed in me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's always meant so much to me.
Yeah. And I'm just realizing that you probably did a lot of growing after I left. And that was a big part of it, that motivation to work on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that really did motivate me and drive me to work on myself, which I'm actually grateful for that process, even though it was painful. I also want to share with you a little bit about your grandchildren.
I would love to hear about them.
Yeah, you know, Tenzin is just really brilliant playing the piano, and he's really extraordinary. He's actually just an extraordinary little human being in general. And your other grandson, Dawa, he's just so delightful. He keeps us laughing and entertained. And I know you just love them both dearly.
I do. I do love them both dearly. Yeah. Yeah, I think you all have done a wonderful job of raising them. And you are doing a wonderful job. And yes, it's very hard. And I'm with you in it. Yeah. And you can come to me anytime to ask me questions. And I'm always supporting you in it because I know what it's like.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd want me to know, Mom?
I think that's it. I can't think of anything else, but just that I'm always with you and I'm always here for you. And we can do this on an ongoing basis if you like.
Yeah, I'd love that.
It feels powerful.
Yeah, I'd love that. And I just want you to know I'll always love you and I'll always miss you too.
Yes, same.
But it also feels really good to know you're always there for me to reach to and to hear your wisdom. Okay. Jensa, we're pausing here because this can be an ongoing, continuous conversation with the continuing bond that you have with your mom forever.
Yeah.
And so now Jen's back in the room here, and I'm wondering what that was like for you. Did you have any takeaways from that?
Oh, it feels so good to be connected in that way. And, you know, I sort of like have these thoughts like, oh, it's supposed to be more negative stuff or something for the role play to be useful. And I'm sure there is, you know, all this sadness too I could share, but just sharing the positive feels really good too.
Oh, so, I know, absolutely. Because we let the client guide it where they want to go. It's like, these are the things I want my mom to know.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the negatives. It's just wherever it goes. And then if we did the work with the daily mood log, I may share some of those thoughts if there were guilt or anything else. But sometimes it's been beautiful that I've seen with clients that they just share, like there's just this yearning to share about their children and their dog and their new home and their growth. And that's a beautiful way to do this process too. It's continues the bond and the connection.
Yeah.
What was it like to hear back from your mom, where she's saying like she's very proud of you and you've done a great job raising your children, and that she said, I am with you and I do love them?
Yeah, that it does. It just feels so good. I mean, she was, you know, really, really always positive and supportive in my life. in general. Obviously there were problems, but in general, you know, I it's just good to feel that and have it, have some awareness of it. Because it just is a real like shift in me then to feel that from her.
What do you feel about your bond when she says, you can come to me anytime, ask me anytime?
Yeah, it feels so good. I mean, we did say, you know, before she died, she told me that like there's no gravestone, but she said, I'll always be there. I mean, she did really actually tell me that, you know, and so I haven't
beautiful
integrated that enough and used it enough in more recent years. So I'm just so thankful to have this again. To me.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing your mom with us.
Thank you. She'd be happy to be shared.
She would be.
She was a psychologist too.
Oh, was she? Wow. Yeah, I feel a love and a connection with her, and just talking to her and hearing her love for you and her current love for your sons.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, what thoughts or questions did you all have? And I know it's already noon, and I shared that this would be an hour and a half. So those of you who want to leave or have to leave, feel free to do that. But for those of you who have thoughts and questions, feel free to ask them. Oh, I'm just now seeing Mike. Oh man, I'm glad I didn't see you at first, Mike. Mike, my hero and my mentor. Oh man, I would have been so anxious going through this process with Mike here. I'm so appreciative of you being here. Mike has been so instrumental in my growth and my life and learning this process. So thank you for even being present.
I just had one takeaway, Tan, that I loved the whole thing. And Jennifer, just feel so connected to you, your heart. And it's like, oh, if I'll have a mom like yours, this world would be a better place, right? And Tan, I love how you acknowledged the importance of each and every one of the techniques we use in TEAM can be a really powerful empathy tool, right? When you use the positive reframe, if you use the word positive, it can sometimes feel a little less connecting. And so we can get creative with that, right? And the same with the daily mood log. To me, it's a powerful empathy tool first, right? And then cognitive as well.
Yeah.
So I just love that gentleness. And even with the distortions, you know, if you do choose to use it, which you can, you do it in a very gentle way. You introduce it differently than you would necessarily, right?
Great point.
So I just love that gentleness is so important. Thank you for doing this. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike, for those takeaways and insights too. There probably is a better way to introduce identifying the distortions that keeps the warmth that can still be helpful and beneficial too. Yeah. What other thoughts or questions? Amy's saying, thank you, Tyann and Jen, all who shared about their own grief. It's been moving and a powerful 1.5 hours. I'm so grateful that you're here. Feel free to also open up your mic if there's any thoughts or questions. Ashley.
So hello again, Tyann. It's great to see you. And Jen, thank you so much for sharing. That was like incredibly moving. And so my question is, as a candidate, I'm still navigating how emotional I allow myself to be with clients.
It got really distorted just now. Did it come out like that for you all? I just heard as a candidate and then.
Yes. Okay. Is this any better?
Yes.
Okay, so as a candidate, I'm finding that I don't allow myself to be very emotional with clients. Like I'm noticing that that's in my burnout.
I heard like most of it, I think. You said as a candidate, you said you realized that you don't allow yourself to be really emotional with your clients.
Yeah. But a part of that is it's increasing my burnout because it's not genuine to not be emotional with them. And so how do you navigate, you know, how powerful that just was for 20 minutes, kind of as a therapist. And some people in chat had put some things in there, but I'd also love to hear your feedback on that.
Yeah, I think just from having trained with you, Ashley, I think there's been a beautiful part of you that feels protective of your clients. You don't want to put like your burdens onto them or kind of, you know, sometimes I think we may not be cautious enough, and then it becomes like they're worried about us and all of our emotions. They feel like they have to protect us. So I know that's been cognizant in your mind. And your question is basically, you don't allow yourself to get really emotional with clients, and you feel like it may be increasing burnout because you don't feel like maybe I'm being my genuine self in this process. I think in going through the 5 secrets, you know, it's when we do the I feel statement, we are sharing that piece of ourselves on how we're affected by them and their story. But we still also say like that I feel statement is for them. It's a way to say like, I'm a human being that's affected, but I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, this is so painful. And now I'm thinking of all of the grief that I've been through, and let me share with you about this and that. Right. So I think doing the I feel statement helps. And I think you've done a beautiful job in doing that and pulling up like I feel statements that don't feel like then it takes over. It's just there as to share like I'm a human being affected by some of your words right now. And so I'm finding myself feeling moved. Like I think I had shared that with Jen, or feeling some sadness come up to also see the beautiful bond you had with your mom, and that she's no longer present or was even able to meet your sons physically. So I think using the I feel statement helps. And also, I don't think there's anything you have to do. Like there's not a process of like, how do I show up more emotionally or not? It's just connecting with the feeling. It's just there, right? As a human being, you're going to feel feelings that comes up as another human being shares something. And so I think it's even letting go of any rules of like, I need to show up more emotionally or I need to tone it down. It's just get in touch, get in tune with what's coming up, and then what feels like it would be helpful to share with my client through an I feel statement that could be connecting. I wonder if that answers your question, Ashley. Yeah.
Yes, it does. And I was just kind of
Oh,
chatting.
Jill's here too. Oh my God.
I just wanted to say, because Tyann, I had put I had started kind of this string in the chat saying that I am quite tearful with patients, and sort of said anyone else, you know, and then a bunch of people shared that they are or that they aren't. And so I just wanted to just say to Ashley, because I kind of heard Ashley saying that I tamp down my emotions, because almost like, because I don't think I'm supposed to be emotional. And other people said that too, like I'm supposed to be a blank slate or something. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to share, I mean, I do cry with my patients. I definitely have tears coming down my face quite frequently with my patients. I'm not like sobbing and asking them to hold me, you know, but I'm totally tearful. It's obvious. I'm wiping my nose and using Kleenex. And all I can say is that I use the BMS and ETS at all of my sessions. I've actually never had a patient give me negative feedback. I've never had someone say it made me uncomfortable or, you know, and I've only ever had positive feedback, which is to say, like, it was so moving to know how much you cared. It was so touching to have you feel with me. And I don't do it intentionally. Like, it just, you know, it's not like I'm trying to cry. Like it either happens or it doesn't happen. And so I just wanted to share that. That's been my experience, which is that I haven't had any negative, you know, feedback on it.
Yeah, you just allow yourself to show up without the shoulds of like, I should tamper this. I remember clearly a woman saying like, when I saw that one tear roll down your face, I felt my pain is valid. Like that meant so much to me. So not only was there not negative feedback, when they can see that you're a human being affected by their pain, I think there's something so connecting and validating about their suffering too. So yeah, thank you so much for that, Jill. I'm also very glad I didn't see you. Like it was just like 4 squares.
You're doing such an amazing job. Yes, you're doing such a beautiful job. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Yes, Jill, Jill and then Rima.
I just wanted to say thank you, Tyann, and of course, Jen, for bringing it to life. I mean, that's, I think that's what you were working on, is this continuing bond. And I so appreciate that, because I went and read the article, you know, with the resource, and it had so much wealth of information. And I worked hospice like 5 years, and I was stuck in the stages too. And this is such a great paradigm shift. And I'm just so happy to kind of that you gave me this new paradigm shift to work with my clients in, you know, in this way. And so I'm just feeling so grateful that, you know, that I came and that you brought it to life, and it feels so accepting, which I love about grief is, you know, the accepting of how painful it is. And so anyway, I was just thankful.
Yeah, and when we really get in touch with it, I think grief is actually a really beautiful process, you know, that just has honored life and honored connections and bonds. I'm also really impressed that you read the resource. Like usually people usually see it, but no one really dives into learning more. So I love that you've done that in your dedication to learn too, Jill. And I also appreciate this paradigm shift from stages and almost like the shoulds of how things should go versus validating it's painful, the bond's there, and waves of pain comes up, but we can continue the bond indefinitely too. Right? Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, let me wrap up with one more question here, and then we'll call it. Okay, let's do two, Rima and then Jen, of course.
Yeah, hi, thank you. This was really helpful. I'm just wondering, because I mean, obviously relationships are very complicated. And I just listened to a podcast yesterday. I forgot what podcast it is, but about a woman who was in grief, but her husband had been an alcoholic and there'd been a lot of problems. So there was love there, but there was also a lot of conflict and a lot of kind of anger. So I'm wondering this grief method, how it fits in. Would you just work on the DML in length first, especially if you're going to speak to them and you know that their reaction has always been anger if you've told them to stop drinking, or you hope, you know, I mean, I'm just wondering about the kind of the dynamics of the grief for this kind of method.
Yeah, that's such a good question, because I've had to think through that too on when is this grief method most effective? I've definitely seen it to be most effective with close connecting bonds. The ones that are more complex, where there's like, mom really actually wasn't that loving. There were times I hated her. I felt like it was important first to work through like reattribution, the resentment, the other spaces of pain and anger before the grief method could be a little bit more effective, where then the parent could actually say like, I was never healthy enough for you. And I have regrets about that, right? But it had to be like working through like that level of hurt from not ever actually having had the parent that they've wanted, or having had the husband that they wish they had first, and some acceptance around that and that person, through reattribution, some more empathy towards that person before the grief method can be a little bit more effective.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
And sometimes I haven't gone there at all, actually, with a client who it just makes sense to keep some distance from that person and some protection. I actually wouldn't have them then take on their parent's voice. So there's kind of a judgment call in that process too. Yeah. Thanks, Rima. Jen, you had your hand up as well. Let's wrap up with our brave volunteer here.
Thanks. Maybe I just had a comment, I guess, or maybe if you have anything to add, but I was just thinking about the experience of I mean, like, it was sometimes just hearing you talk, tell me, you know, before in the role play, but like explaining it, you know, that brings up stuff that feels helpful already in it. And then I also wanted to say, like, in the role play, when you, or right after it, when you asked what it was like to hear that, to hear your mother say that, I think it is super helpful if there's a recording of it, and then I can actually, you know, like receive it as myself, because when I'm speaking as my mother, you know, I'm not receiving it quite in the same way as if,
oh, that's great.
Oh, wait, or did we actually do that? Oh, now I'm confusing myself. Sorry.
No, I think that's a great point, because I often will repeat it back, you know, like what was it like to hear her say, well, honey, you know, I'm proud of you, or I see your growth. But I think what you're saying is actually even more powerful, because I haven't done it that way, actually, where let's record this and have you listen to that back, or we could even replay it here and then process that through on what that's like.
Yeah, it was sinking. Yeah.
Anyway, sink in on another level, continues to bond on a deeper level even. Yeah, great suggestion.
Anyway,
thank you. Well, we are 15 minutes past time already, so I just greatly appreciate everyone. And let me send in the feedback form into the chat. I'll email it as well. But I appreciate all of your time and all of your feedback and support in this process too. Our community is just so awesome. And you know, we're in a community that all knows the 5 secrets, and it's like the warmest, kindest group of people that we can connect with. Okay, so I'm sending in the feedback form and appreciate any feedback that you all will have. And then we'll see you on August the 4th if you'd like to join us for part 2. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care and have a great week.
Diane, what did you say was the link to sign up for the August 4th one?
Let me go ahead and type that in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Quick question, Tyann, is this available, this actual webinar, for us to review again, or okay?
Yeah, I'll